You're listening to Talking Africa, the podcast that gets behind the news from the continent, brought to you by the Africa Report. Get up to speed with all our reporting at theafricareport.com on the coronavirus, on the Egyptian billionaire rattling sabres against Ethiopia, and on the $10 billion debt Nigeria is stumbling into. I'm Nick Norbrook. Welcome to the show. My guest this week, Melinda Gates, has been fighting for the rights of women around the world for 2 decades. Last year, she brought out a book, The Moment of Lift, that shows just what can be done when women are empowered and underlines the unpaid work women do around the world. And move to action by what the UN calls a shadow pandemic of violence against women during lockdown sparked by coronavirus, the co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been speaking out. In a wide-ranging conversation, we talk about a woman's right to choose when to have children, the economic impact of women in the workforce and how to make women visible in the formal economy, and the way coronavirus has hit other non-pandemic health challenges.
Yes, we're seeing it in country after country that the rates of harassment and domestic violence are on the rise substantially. And in many cases, we don't honestly even know all the numbers because we know women are afraid or can't get out of their homes to come report what's going on. But one of the places, for instance, where this is being worked on, as I'm sure you're hearing, is in South Africa. President Ramaphosa has been meeting and using his voice, but he's been meeting with the local advocacy groups and really listening to them about how do you reach women, that it's not just shelters and beds, but how do you make sure that when we do find a woman who's in a violent situation, you can reach out to her with psychological services, bring her in, give her legal counsel, and then also help her with her life and livelihood. She needs money to be able to get out of that situation. And so it's fantastic that he's listening so deeply to the advocacy groups who've been doing this work for quite some time. They're the ones out in the communities really getting to hear what's going on right now. And then he's also now elevating it to the AU level.
Can you outline what the economic hit of this COVID-19 pandemic has been like for women? Will, for example, the jobs traditionally done by women be hit worse?
Yes, we believe that the rollback in women's jobs is hitting women far more substantially than men because women, so many of their jobs are not in the formal part of the economy. They're in the informal part of the economy. And yet, many women across the continent are struggling to put food on the table for their children. And we know that the woman is often the center of the family. She decides who eats and when. But we so often don't talk about the unpaid labor that women do all over the world, but particularly on the continent of Africa, in country after country, women are not only caring for the young children and the elderly, she's the one trying to scrape the meal together. She's the one cooking many times all day without the conveniences that a woman might have, say, in Paris or in New York City. And so they're the ones pushed out of the informal sector and even the formal sector as well. Women are losing their jobs at a disproportionate rate to men. And so there's quite a concern about will those jobs be gained back or not. Now, the good news is there's some things we can do about that. Like Burkina Faso is already seeing, okay, we should start to waive utilities fees for women-led small businesses, these small stalls that women have, these storefronts, waive the utility fees for now. So at least take that cost down. We're seeing women themselves start to space their businesses from other women's businesses so that customers feel safe coming. I think we have to look at what are the solutions that communities and women and men are coming up with, and how do we follow those and create good policies around those.
So this, in a way, you're saying by understanding how COVID impacts women and men differently, this can help us plan the recovery.
Absolutely. And the other thing we can do is, again, we know that there's a mobile phone ownership gap in Africa, but the bigger gap, honestly, is the having access to the internet, which we know when a man or woman has access to internet, it's information in their hands, so they know when to go to for health services, where to go safely. So again, bringing down some of the prices for mobile internet access and usage will really help women, because again, we know that if a woman has access to a bank account online on her mobile phone, that's at scale in Kenya, that's at scale in Tanzania. When she can save $1 a day, $2 a day, then she has money, and money is power. It's spending power. She can put food on the table. She's more likely actually to enter the labor force. We believe we have good data out of Southeast Asia. We're still trying to collect it in many countries in Africa, but it looks like if she has a bank account, she's again more likely to enter the formal sector than stay in the informal sector.
You explain how economically marginalized women are often invisible to their own governments. No phone, no formal ID, no tax records. How then do you design, for example, an emergency cash transfer system? How do we include them in any sort of social security expansion efforts? And what would be the benefits of doing so?
Well, so for instance, you can do exactly what Kenya is doing. In their next upcoming economic survey, they're actually asking specific questions about women in it to understand the effects of women from COVID-19. The other thing we can do is on the national surveys that have been done in the past in many countries, they were unfortunately gender biased. I'll give you an example. The best national surveys that were being done in country after country, they would go into the household at the time and say, who's the primary breadwinner? And so often, the man would answer. And as soon as he did, they went down a whole series of questions about his income, but they never asked the woman about her income. And what we know is that women actually have income. It just is more often from the informal sector. And so without learning about those women's income and what their needs are and how we can design programs to help them save it, we're just missing whole sets of data. Now, where have good policy and programs been designed? I'll use an example from Southeast Asia and India. They actually have been collecting now through fintech a lot of good data about women's mobile phone usage, penetration of mobile phones. Pakistan is behind in that, but because India had the data, when India started to put its cash transfer payments during the COVID crisis to help people with the food crisis through the mobile phone wallets, they could direct those payments directly into a woman's account. And we have great data from around the world, from Mexico and other places, that when the cash transfer gets in the woman's mobile wallet, she spends it differently on her family in terms of their health and their livelihood than a man does. And so India went directly to the women. Pakistan less so, because they didn't have the data yet to know how to do it and where to target the women. But the other thing, when you do that with a government cash transfer program, is you take a huge amount of graft out of the system as well. And so those are well-designed programs based on having collected data.
I hear a lot of anecdotal evidence about how certainly boards which have greater gender representativity on them perform better over time. Do you have solid data sets which can explain how women-owned businesses in Africa, for example, do better over the long term? Are they a better credit risk? Do they make more money? Are they more sustainable?
Well, we don't have the specifics that I know of on women-led businesses yet. Again, this is where, we've collected data for so long, to be frank, around men's issues and men's businesses. We absolutely have the board level data, just as you say, but the women's businesses less so. What we do know, though, about men and women is partly how they organize their lives. When we can start to see how they organize their lives, even on their phones, you can start to see whether they're credit worthy or not. So you can use machine learning to look at their data and see what they've been doing and how systematic they are about it. And that's actually a predictor, quite honestly, of whether they can take out a loan or get credit and pay it back. But that's the kind of thing we need to be doing so much more often. And we can use other surveys. Like one of the things we learned, there was no data being done, for instance, on family planning and contraceptives for a very long time across the continent. Once we went in and started doing robust data collection in a few countries in Africa, we started to learn that there was power in not only learning about what contraceptives women used, were they coerced, what did they know about their bodies, but we started to learn that just by asking them their story, women will tell you, no one's ever asked the story of my life before. That started to create empowerment. It was a complete surprise to us. But it's so interesting what you start to learn when you actually finally collect data.
So if I was a policymaker in Africa, which I'm not, thankfully, but if I had that responsibility and I wanted to boost women-owned businesses, what would be 3 relatively simple policies for me to try and push through?
I would right now start to say I'm going to waive the utility fees for now. I would say on mobile phone usage, I'm going to make sure I help get mobile phone usage up for women and get the cost of mobile internet down. And I'm going to start to collect data about phone usage for women. And then the last thing I would say is in the area of contraceptives. We know if a woman has kids too often and too soon, and she can't space the births of her children, she will be locked into a cycle of poverty. Whereas women will tell you, I want to space the births of my children, but they need knowledge, not just about their bodies, but they need access to contraceptives. When you do that and they can space the births of their children, or some of them choose to have fewer ones, they will tell you, I can keep running this little business that I have started. It's not unlike other women all over the world.
What impact did these various lockdowns in various African countries have on other non-COVID related health issues affecting women in Africa?
Well, as we said earlier, it's increased one of the biggest barriers to women. I mean, one of the biggest barriers that holds women back is harassment and violence. And that is on the rise across the continent and across the world. And so when a woman is in that situation, she can't find her voice. She can't go out and have earning potential quite often. So that is one of the things that I think is most concerning during this time.
You talk about a stockpiling of the ingredients that go into contraception. Is this still happening, and what impact is it having?
Yes, if a country chooses to stockpile their contraceptives and doesn't get them out to the communities who need them the most, the first thing you get is a rise in teen pregnancy. And the other thing we have to look at is that girls are often out of school, girls and boys, but girls in particular, are often the first ones pulled out of school during something like this. So during a pandemic, one of the things we can do is keep girls, that is adolescent girls, in girls' collectives. We have great data after the Ebola crisis that the girls who were able to stay in a small collective of individuals continued to do their learning. They continued to be inspired by one another. They continued to learn about their bodies. They continued to find out, where can I use contraceptive? And so the teen pregnancy rate was much lower amongst those groups. So even in Niger, we're already seeing the girls there say, hey, we can space the times of day that we do our girls' collectives. And yes, fewer of us should come together, and no, school is not open, but we can continue to figure out how to learn together. There's power in that, and we see that all over the world in both girls and women's collectives. And that is something that we're starting to get data about.
I've been reading up on an ugly branch of ecofascism that suggests that the planet needs less people, often less black and brown people. How do you speak to critics on the continent who are sometimes worried that the focus on population that they get from other parts of the world is, a manifestation of what they might see as the new eugenics?
I say to them, we have to learn from history. And there was a time when, it wasn't that long ago, it was in the 1970s, where a group of countries had the idea that from the top down, we should have less population. That is the wrong way to go about contraceptives.